But again, the real point lies in a different direction. The theistic noetic structure already, of course, includes the existence of God. Relative to that noetic structure, therefore, there is no additional achenistic cost in the hypothesis of guided evolution. As an analogy, suppose we land a spaceship on a planet we know is inhabited by intelligent creatures. We find something that looks exactly like a stone arrowhead, complete with grooves and indentations, apparently made in the process of shaping and sharpening it. Two possibilities suggest themselves. One, that it acquired these characteristics by way of erosion, let's say, and the other, that it was intentionally designed and fashioned by the inhabitants. Someone with a couple of courses in philosophy might suggest that the former hypothesis is to be preferred because it posits fewer entities than the latter. He'd be wrong, of course, since we already know the planet contains intelligent creatures. There is no achenistic cost involved in thinking these structures designed. The same would go for evolution. Theists already accept divine design and do not incur additional achenistic cost by way of thinking of evolution as guided. This objection to guided evolution would have more by way of teeth if we, theists and atheists alike, were starting from an agnostic position, and then the theist proposed to postulate the existence of a divine designer in order to explain the course of evolution. That would be substantially like offering a theistic argument. And then the availability of a non-theistic alternative hypothesis, provided the relevant likelihood wasn't too overwhelmingly small, would indeed undercut the argument. But of course, in this context, the theist isn't presenting a theistic argument. She already accepts divine design, and hence the fact that guided evolution involves more entities than unguided evolution is no reason in favor, with respect to her noetic structure, no reason in favor of the latter. Since that is so, there is no conflict here between theistic religion and evolutionary science. I've argued that contemporary scientific theory of evolution, taken as including Darwinism, does not entail the claim that natural selection is unguided. But suppose I'm mistaken, or suppose instead that current evolutionary theory itself evolves in such a way that this claim becomes part of it. This could certainly happen. We can easily imagine the authorities in the textbooks stating the theory in such a way as to explicitly include the claim that natural selection is unguided by any personal agent. After all, many, perhaps most biologists believe that it is unguided. Would that show that there is scientific evidence against theism? Hardly. We can imagine physics evolving in the same direction. All the physics textbooks unite in endorsing general relativity, adding that the behavior of large-scale physical systems is never guided by any personal agents. In either case, obviously, would it follow that there is scientific evidence against theism? Annexing a proposition P to one for which there is evidence doesn't automatically confer evidence on P. I learned that Whitey is a Frisian lifeguard. That increases the probability that he can swim. It also increases the probability of the proposition Whitey can swim, and the next toss of this coin will land heads. But it does not increase the probability that the next toss of this coin will land heads. And even if, contrary to fact, there were scientific evidence for unguided evolution, and hence for atheism, that would by no means settle the issue. Suppose there is scientific evidence against theism. It doesn't follow that theism is false, or that theists have a defeater for their beliefs, or that theistic belief is irrational, or is in some other way problematic. Perhaps there is also scientific evidence or otherwise for theism. But second, and more important, as I mentioned, if theism is true, it is likely that it has its own intrinsic and basic source of warrant, something like the sensus divinitatis proposed by John Calvin, or the natural but confused knowledge of God proposed by Thomas Aquinas. If so, the warrant for theistic belief doesn't depend on the state of current science. Indeed, what Christians and other theists should think of current science can quite properly depend, in part, on theology. For example, science has not spoken with a single voice about the question whether the universe has a beginning. First, the idea was that it did, but then the steady-state theory triumphed, but then Big Bang cosmology achieved ascendancy, but now there are straws in the wind suggesting a reversion to the thought that the universe is without beginning. The sensible Christian believer is not obliged to trim her sails to the current scientific breeze on this topic, revising her belief on the topic every time science changes its mind. If the most satisfactory Christian or theistic theology endorses the idea that the universe did indeed have a beginning, isn't eternal, let's say, the believer has a perfect right to accept that thought. If so, then even if there were scientific evidence against theism, and no propositional evidence, arguments, let's say, scientific or otherwise in favor of it, it still might be both rational and warranted. Finally, Section 3, Naturalism versus Evolution. Naturalism comes in more than one variety. Here, as I said, I take it to be the view that there is no such person as the God of theistic religion, nor anything at all like God. So taken, naturalism is not a religion. Nevertheless, it is a crucial part of the naturalistic worldview, which in turn plays at least one of the most important roles of a religion. This worldview functions as a sort of myth in a technical sense of that term. It offers a way of interpreting ourselves to ourselves, a way of understanding our origin and significance at the deep level of religion. It tells us where we come from, what our prospects are, what our place in the universe is, whether there is life after death, and the like. We could therefore say that it is a quasi-religion. What I propose to argue next is that naturalism and current science are incompatible, so that there is a religion, or quasi-religion, science conflict, sure enough, but it's between science and naturalism, not science and theistic religion. What I'll argue is that naturalism is incompatible with evolution in the sense that one can't rationally accept them both. Since I've given this argument elsewhere, I can be brief. First, note that naturalists are all or nearly all materialists about human persons. A human person is a material object through and through, with no immaterial self or soul or subject. For present purposes, therefore, I'll assimilate materialism to naturalism. The central premises of the argument are as follows, where N is naturalism, E is current evolutionary theory, and R is the proposition that our cognitive faculties are reliable. The argument goes like this. First premise, the probability of R on N and E is low. Second premise, one who accepts N and E and sees that one is true as a defeater for R. Third premise, this defeater can't be itself defeated.